Welcome back to Motorcycle Ride and the Touring Sportster build. So far in this series, we have mainly tackled comfort. I've tried to reduce vibration by replacing motor mounts and swing arm mounts. I've worked up here right now. We are mid-pack on that one. I'm getting some replacement parts there. All those were just to make it more comfortable and vibrate less. The other thing I want is to reduce my risk of mechanical failure when I am long ways out. So in today's episode, we're basically going to replace all the hoses, lines, and cables. The hoses, specifically the oil lines to and from the oil tank, I have noticed some weeping on those a little bit, and I showed y'all that in the earlier video. I also noticed that some of the vacuum lines had small cracks. In addition, the fuel lines are just old. So I might as well replace all those at once and get it out of the way so I know I won't have less risk of problems there. The cables, on the other hand, all of them are working fine as far as I know, but they are all 20 years old, and cables are fairly cheap. So I'm going to replace them all, but hold on to the ones I take off and put them into my emergency parts bag so that if anything does go wrong on the road, I can access those. So that's what we're doing today, which means the very first thing I need to do is do an oil change, or at least the first part of an oil change. Now, one of the things that has always freaked me out about Sportsters, and I guess it makes sense because it doesn't carry its oil in the engine, it actually carries it in the oil tank. So, you know, you've got that feed coming through, is it doesn't have a bolt or a screw to hold the oil in. It just uses a cork, like a wine bottle. I think it's the funniest thing in the world. We have a hose that's coming down, which another hose I've got to replace. And on bottom is quite literally a cork. Now, I distrust this thing so much I put a clamp on it last time, but it is quite literally a cork. You just kind of pull it out of that hose, and then when you put it in, you kind of anchor it to the frame rail to keep it still, but still, it's a cork. And then we have the oil filter. I will say this, one thing I appreciate about Harley is the Harley brand oil filters. You have an option of having one with a little wrench on the outside, so you don't need to get a custom bracket, but that's what I have. It just kind of fits on my wrench, and here we go. And before it breaks totally loose, don't forget a bunch of paper towels. Oh, this is so messy. And then we can attach the new oil filter. Be sure to put a dab of oil on the outside. Yeah, I know I'm using old oil, but I'm not using much. Clean the rim. Then screw it on. Simple as that. I am not filling it up with oil. I'm just putting the oil filter on so no more leaks out. And I typically just do it hand tight. I don't need a wrench to put it on. I just need a wrench to take it off. And to make cleanup a little bit easier, I have a highly diluted set of Simply Green, and I would just flood everything so that as much oil will flow down into the pan along with everything else. That way, hopefully, we don't end up with oil drips on the concrete. And because we are going to be working with the clutch cable, replacing that, we might as well get the oil out of the transmission, the quart in there. Just remember, you know, Sportsters have 2 tanks, oil tanks that you have to change. Big Twins have 3. And this one only holds a quart. Some of y'all might have known my main tank was a bit low, but that was on purpose for another reason. I had halfway done the oil change before I started thinking I ought to film it.
And this is magnetic. I have a little bit of shavings there, but not much, so I think that's pretty good.
Now, one oil leak you can somewhat prevent is this drain plug comes with a little O-ring right here, and it's cheap insurance just to swap it out for a new one every single time you do an oil change. Now, I will say, first time I did oil change, the Harley dealer had a box of these because it's probably the same thing on every single Harley made, and they were charging like $1 each, which I thought was ridiculous. So I just went to the Bezos store and bought like 50 of them for $3. You just gotta make sure you don't lose them. But yeah, and you'll probably have a use for this kind of O-ring somewhere else too. But now I have a new O-ring.
And reinstalling is easy. You do want to feed it in, thread it in by hand, because this is aluminum and the plug is steel, so it's very easy to strip it out and then torque it down to the correct specs. The owner's manual says that's between 14 and 21, which is tight but not too tight. My arm is not carefully calibrated, but I think that's good enough.
Since the oil is now drained, I'm going to go ahead and start replacing all the oil cables. I did go to Harley-Davidson and I bought a feed line and a return line. I've seen on the forums and in other videos and stuff like that, people seem to think these are cheap. I didn't. I thought they were kind of expensive, so I didn't want to spend the money for a custom bent oil drain line. So I just went to the auto parts store and bought some 3/8" hose, and that'll work for the oil drain line, I'm quite sure. Now, Harley-Davidson installs these with, what do they call these? Well, the part is drain hose clamps. I got them direct from Harley-Davidson. They're the kind that are one-time use where you pinch them, and they require a special tool to use. I had to go to Harbor Freight to buy this. It was $12. It's its only purpose. This is kind of one of those situations where my propensity to default to whatever the engineers say to do, the people that designed this and built this, these are the clamps they use from the factory, which is why I went ahead and purchased them. But they were kind of pricey, and I don't quite understand why I couldn't use just a regular hose clamp, the kind you screw together. There are several different styles, because these are a pain to get off, and in the field, if anything goes wrong, I basically have to destroy the clamp to get it off, and I won't have a clamp other than a zip tie in the field, though I will probably stash a few hose clamps in my toolkit, extra parts kit. So I'm defaulting to the factory, but I'm not understanding why these are better. Maybe some of y'all can leave a comment down below to tell me why. But that's what we're going to be doing. I'm stuffing a paper towel underneath because I assume it's going to leak. Here's a drain line, here's a feed line, and the return line goes through here to the other side. So let's try and get these off, and once again, I'm not quite sure how to remove them. That's now broke. I forgot to take off this hose holder. Be careful with this. This is a bolt nut you do not want to lose. And the other side of that hose is right here. Did I mention how much I hate these types of hose clamps? And of course, we've got a mess. Now make sure that I don't know what you call that, the hose fitting or whatever you're sliding the hose on is really clean, so you don't risk any more future leaks. So we're going to feed the end with a little kink in it.
through to get it in, which the kink kind of gets in the way. Trying to get this through, but isn't that always the case? Slide on our first expensive hose clamp, and then somehow force the hose onto the... And you want to make sure it is fully seated. That is very, very important. Then you want to position that clamp not at the very end, but closer to the where the metal flange kind of bulges out, so it will sink it down like that. Then, you know, that goes on the flat, and you just kind of squeeze it together. Which, once again, I am not sure why they use these clamps. I hate these. And this tool doesn't work. There's not enough gap right here. Okay, this thing sucks. So I'm now making the decision that the engineers from Harley-Davidson didn't know what they were doing and telling us to do this one, and I'm going back to, you know, just a simple screw type hose clamps, because I am so unbelievably sick of dealing with this thing. Yeah, this is a lot easier. Okay, the return line is on the other side. I can't really show this with the camera. It's back behind this cover, and I'm hoping and praying I don't have to take the cover off. I don't think I do, but that clamp that they have, getting it off when it's behind this cover is becoming a bit of a nightmare. And I don't want to leverage against this because I could easily see it snapping. It's just a piece of aluminum. Okay, with that off, now we gotta figure out how to get the hose off. Well, if it didn't leak before, it would leak now. I've torn this hose so far apart. It still hasn't popped off yet. It appears to be loose. I've got it rotating on the spigot. Just can't seem to pull it out because I have to pull it through this. Well, let's try it from the other side. Over here we have a lot more access. And I got paper towels ready because I imagine there's going to be some spillage on this one. It's just that initial stiction that makes these things stick so hard. Once you get moving, they come off pretty easy. There was one zip tie in the middle anchoring that. And then you can just pull it through, I guess. Well, I'm not sure how to weave this hose out of here. I tried just pulling hard. And that worked. Threw a lot of oil everywhere, but it worked. So now that this is loose, maybe I can just twist this to break that one loose. Feed this down, that'll give me more purchase, and I can just pull it off, right? That should work. Okay. Now maybe if twisting it will break it loose. Hey, that did it. Twisting is the key. So now the question becomes, what's going to be the easiest way to feed this thing through? I wish I could find any kind of video on doing this, but it's not even in the book, which I found kind of disappointing. They basically just said, change hoses, this is where the ends are. Okay, it's definitely easier feeding it through this way. I'm gonna guess it's because the hose is so much more pliant, new, than that old one, which had hardened. But yeah, that was a lot easier. And boom. Slide on the hose clamp, slide it on the spigot, and be happy. Now I'm clueless why they have the spigot, my finger right here, the spigot is coming straight out at that angle right here, but it's on a screw thread, so why couldn't they just have the spigot pointing down? Would sure make life a lot easier. Probably the same guys that designed the clamp. Figured this one out, right? Damn, that was a pain in the ass. I gotta say, this side, much, much easier. So much easier. That ain't going anywhere. And now for the oil drain line, which has me a little bit perplexed because it appears to me to be 3 hoses with 1 metal hose in the middle. Or I should say 2 rubber hoses, and on each side is a metal hose. And I don't know why. So I'm going to remove the cork and see if I can pull it through. There we go. It's got this metal thing in the middle, which is kind of weird. So let's get these bloody clamps off and see what we got. It seems weird is this, it starts out at 3/8 like I have, but then it transitions to something bigger. I'm not sure what to do there. So I guess what I'm going to do is, remove these clamps and then just cut my hose to these 2 links and attach it and do the best I can here. That's probably where all the leaking came from, because I see dirt and stuff like that. It's probably never meant to be like that, but it is what it is. Just seems with this joinery, though, it's just adding more places where it could leak in the future. It's a metal hose, but I kinked it right there. I'm not sure if that means anything or not. So on the last one, I finally figured it out. All you gotta do is take it to your grinder and grind off the tip, and then they'll just kind of pop right off. This is just plastic, I think. Some hard plastic. So what I have is my 3 parts, and then I have some hose I bought from the store. First thing I'm going to do is square up the hose, because whenever they cut it, the guy just takes his pocket knife and cuts it. Not a very good job, so go ahead and square that up as best I can. Okay, first hose looks to be about that big. Second hose, about that big. Not quite sure what the angles were supposed to be, but we'll just slide these on and not stress about it. I did have to go buy some bigger hose clamps because they were out of the small ones. This is something somebody taught me, because you don't really want this to be loose a lot of times. So if you just take a pair of pliers, come back a little bit, and you can actually bend them more than they need to be, and they will tighten closer to the clamp so you don't catch it as easily. So come back close to the head and just kind of torque it a little bit more than it should, and that way it'll spring close. I've also seen other people put a zip tie around them or tape or something like that, but this seems to work just fine. So the big question is it going to fit on this thing? As I thought, it's not fitting very easily, so I'm going to try warming it up. Oh, heating it helped, but not enough, it seems like. Looks like Harley-Davidson's going to get me for another hose. I just basically need a 1/2-inch hose that goes down to a 3/8 hose. Why they made it this way, I do not know. It's just a drain plug. Why make it so complicated? But at least while that's waiting for that, I can go ahead and get this cork resituated. Since I can't progress any farther until I get parts, that one hose, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the fuel lines. For that one, I've got these clear tubes, which I'm told should be a little bit better, what are they, vinyl or something like that, than the rubber ones I have. And we'll just do this one for the fuel line and this one for the vacuum line. All that to get here, and it looks like we got lucky, and then we could take this clamp off with a screwdriver, which I like much better. Twisting the way to make the magic work, just like before. Why don't I learn my lessons? That's nice, smooth, and clean. It's going to be too big, so now I got to get a fuel hose too. So the trip to the Harley dealership was successful and unsuccessful. You know, I went
mainly to get this piece right here. It's 3 inch on one side and a 1/2 inch on the other, I believe. I couldn't squeeze that oil hose on to do that one. Well, they don't sell just this part. You have to buy the whole cable, whole hose, I mean. But that hose was only $8, so no big deal. Then I went to get the fuel line hose, and of course, this was on back order for a few weeks. That one right over there is going to take a week to get in, so I didn't want to wait for that. So I'm just went and bought some 3/8 inch fuel line. The factory one is bent, but I don't think that's going to matter too much. Squirt a little WD-40 in there, and then slide it on. And let me tell you that WD-40 does make him slide on easier. Slide the heat shield back on, and then we can just kind of feed it through, and it'll connect underneath the tank. So with all the hoses done, with the exception of the drain line, which waiting for a part 4, let's turn our attention to cables. I have a choke cable, I have throttle cables, and I have a new clutch cable. And remember, all these are now working. They might be a bit stiff, but I'm going to save them and put them in my emergency stash parts can, because cables don't take up that much space, and that way if anything goes wrong on the road, I'll have a spare. Start with the choke cable. So what we have here is not much. So it looks like that. Okay, so let's figure this thing out. Okay, so the cable starts on this side and goes around through here, and obviously the plunge comes in sideways right there. So this is one of those instances where I think it's probably just going to be easier, just go ahead and disconnect the carburetor, and then I can also run the throttle cables at the same time, at least up to the handlebars, and connect them before I put the carburetor back on. So yeah, plus I'm doing a carb clean and a jet change anyways. So let's go ahead and take the carb off. So we'll disconnect the choke by simply unscrewing it, using the most sophisticated of tools, a monkey wrench. When that loose, it just slides down. All it is a squeeze fit. So then we'll just take the carburetor off by pulling it out. It's just a rubber gasket holding it, and then we have easier access to those throttle cables that we're going to replace. Okay, this is the 4th time I've done it because I keep screwing up the camera, not because this is overly hard. But basically, these have a little rubber condom over the adjuster on your throttle cable. So you just bring that down, and then you have a large screw and another screw. Just take 2 monkey wrenches and open them up. This is a locking nut, so I just screw that all the way down. And this is how we adjust our throttle cables, because this basically lengthens or shortens the tube that the cable is in. It doesn't adjust the cable itself, it adjusts the tube it's in. So if we make the tube shorter, theoretically we made the cable longer. So I'm just going to screw that down, thus drawing this up, making the cable shorter, and then we'll go down to the carburetor and you can see how much it loosens it up. Be sure and stuff the hole so nothing forms a nest in there while we're working on it. So, making a quick mental note that the choke cable comes out at, roughly, I guess, 10:30. Then go ahead and loosen that up. Got it started. Like that. Everything looks the same, so I'm just going to slide this right back in.
it's plastic and it's got some curling on bottom, so obviously this is meant to be finger tight. So we now have our first emergency backup cable for the road. So with that taken care of, let's turn our attention back to the rest of the throttle cables. So we've got to loosen up the throttle housing. Basically, we're going to remove the throttle itself to get to the ends of the cables. There are two parts to the end of the cable that you do not want to lose. And that's these two little brass things on the end of the cable. They are actually a separate part that locks it in. So you kind of wind it up and pull it out and hope you don't lose them. See, they themselves come off like that. And from there, our throttle cables are pretty much loose. Just pull them through. And then it's just a matter of feeding them through the channels, and we have our second set of spare cables. I do know there's this little clip right here that I'm going to save for the other ones. Just keeps them nice and together. So the two throttle cables are identical to each other, though this one, the adjusters are a little bit closer and don't seem to be as robust, but you know, once again, these are cheap Amazon knockoffs of what Harley does. But there is a difference at the other end. One of them has a spring, the other does not. The spring side one attaches to what they call the idle side, the idle adjustment side. So you have this screw right here, which kind of goes up and down, and it will adjust how open this is. That's how you adjust your idle. So we want to make sure that the spring is on the return. So when you're closing the throttle, that's which side that the spring cable goes to. So let's go ahead and install the cables up on the handlebar, making sure that I'm going to do the spring side first so that I know it's going to be on the push side. Okay, so I have the cable that has the screw, the spring on one side, and basically, you know, you roll the throttle on and this side pulls and this side pushes, and then the return is backwards. So we want to attach the spring side on this side right here. So I'm going to basically thread it through. And we are going to attach this easy to lose little clip. So basically we come to the big side, we slide it on, then we rotate it so it's a barrel, and then we come back through and slide it in. Boom. That side is now done. Then on the other side, it's a matter of rinsing and repeating. And then we can lift up the housing, slip it in, and there we go. We'll go ahead and screw that down. You want to get these things started with just kind of finger pressure because they are easy to cross thread. And I wouldn't tighten them both down completely until you've got them both started. The problem I'm having with these, and again, this is what you get for buying cheap crap, is that the rubber gasket that they have on it is just, it's not big enough. I mean, it's too big, but that right there is way too loose. So I'm trying to figure out what to do here, because the rubber just does not fit. So these cheap Bezos store ones don't fit perfectly. They will work, but for a short hop as a repair. So these are now my emergency set, and I'm going to lubricate the factory ones and stick them back on. But you get where we're going so far. So when we come back, I'll have the factory ones back on and we'll route them through. So going back to the real Harley ones, you can tell that the male portion of the ends, one is definitely larger than the other one, and the larger one
does, I mean the smaller one does have the spring on the end. The 3 different dealerships I went to looking for some cable lube, didn't have any, so I'm just going to use this Bel-Ray 6-in-1 stuff. One end is probably going to be bigger than the other, so that's the side I would go to. And just give it a little squirt, let it sit for a little bit, and give it a little bit more. And you could probably make some dirty jokes while you're letting it soak all the way down. Then it's just a matter of rinse and repeat. Don't need to show you all this over again. With that set, the little metal things will fit right in. So we can now feed it through the front forks and then through the sleeve. Take our little clip it on so they stay together. And then we will put the carburetor back on. Attach the one with the spring on it. That one goes into the return side. And now the other one gets set into the throttle side. And then reseat the carburetor. Then it's a matter of simply adjusting this knob until you have just a little bit of slack in your throttle. You don't want to make it 100% tight, but you also don't want it to be, an 1/8 of a turn of slop. Just a little bit so that you know your throttle fully released. I'm going to hold off on that now because I'm about to take the carburetor apart to do the next video in the series, which is all about suck bang blow, and I'm going to be cleaning and changing jets. So let's move on to the clutch cable. Now once again we have an adjuster. And it is behind yet another little waterproof condom thing. And once again, we want to shrink the hose, which will lengthen the handle, the cable. So we loosen the lock nut, and then you can grab this top nut to anchor it so you can screw the adjuster in. It's held to the frame with 2 simple clips. With that done, you can pull in the clutch, and then as you release it, you can kind of release the cable from the housing, and there we go. So that side is loose. Then to release the clutch lever itself, you have a pin here. See how I'm kind of pushing it up and down? Well, that little pin is held on with just a little C-clip that we got to remove. My problem is I just can't see well enough to see where the end of the C-clip is. There we go. You definitely don't want to lose that. But with that done, the pin will push right on through. And with the pin out, you can now take the clutch lever off. And then this pin will come out. And you can remove that into the clutch. Now to get the other end, we've got to remove the derby cover, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the timing cover anyways, because we drained the oil and we're doing all this tune-up at the same time. Two of the screws I had to drill and tap to get out, but we now have the derby cover off, I think. There we go. We then need to remove the gasket. And generally, you put a new one of these on every time you do that. You open these.
We're supposed to take the spring out. Just fit in like that. So now we're supposed to turn the clutch adjustment screw, that thing right here, clockwise. And that should release that. Pops off like that. That comes off. And now we can just unscrew this from the body. This turns the whole cable, which is why we had to disconnect everything before doing this part. I guess once it's loose, you can just twist the cable, which is much faster. Here's a tiny O-ring right here. I'm going to see about replacing that. Actually, that looks pretty good. So we will just reassemble it. Slide the cable in. Okay, so now we have this. That goes on like that. Wraps around. And then we go reassemble that. And then we screw this in counterclockwise. So we are supposed to now turn this clutch adjustment screw counterclockwise until we feel resistance, and then go a quarter turn loose. At which point I'm going to clean everything off pretty good. Put a little dollop of grease on the inside. And then do my best attempt to get this in, which, if history is correct, this might be the hardest part of the whole thing because I lack three-hand coordination that this thing requires. But if you don't get it just perfect, it will leak on you. Make sure the area where the gasket seats is nice and clean. And then there we go. So let me get all these installed, and I'm going to have to replace two of them because they stripped out and I had to drill them out, drill and tap them. So I'll get those torqued down, but for now, let's head up back to the handlebars and do that part. So we're going to feed the cable in between. Come back out here. I have the new, what is that, nylon bushing. So we are going to drop the O into there, put in the nylon bushing. I've already put that brass thing in there. It's being held in with just a little bit of grease. Oops. Nylon bushing goes the other way. It's got a little lip on the top. There we go. So we come in. The nylon's only going to fit this way because there's a lip right here. So we push it forward and we go ahead and seat the clutch. Make sure the brass doesn't fall out. And I'm going to put a little grease on here. The instructions don't say it, but it just makes sense to me. Drop that in. And then we have the C-clip from earlier that is going to basically secure everything together.
And voila, it's done, though it does need adjustment. But before I adjust it, I'm going to redo this. There seems to be a lot of slop here, so I'm going to reroute the cable to the other side of the headlight and come through. Plus, it'll make that curve a little bit less, so it'll be easier pull, I think. So just real quickly, going to redo that one so it's on the other side of the headlight. Well, I don't really know when my microphone battery went down, but basically we've got everything done now. Clutch cables, throttle cables, fuel lines, and oil lines. So hopefully while I'm out 10,000 miles away from home, if anything goes wrong, it won't be those things. And on the cables, I have spares. Though, if you remember, on the throttle side, I'm back to my original ones simply because the ones I bought, which were specifically built for this model of Sportster, according to the manufacturer, didn't fit. But what can you expect? They were $25 from the Bezos company, and for the set, and the set from Harley-Davidson is about $65. But if anything does happen on those roads, out on the road, I can use those will work temporarily until I get back to a place where I can order the real Harley-Davidson cables. But these should be okay. And they were never gritty or anything like that, so I'm happy with that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to go out for a test ride and show everything with you, but we still don't have oil on it because I'm waiting on that oil line, but that's the simplest of all of them to run through, especially if I'm just buying it from Harley-Davidson and it's already got the little plastic part in the middle. Just feed it on through. But that's what's holding the oil in the engine. So without oil in the engine, I ain't riding this thing. Anyways, y'all be safe, have fun, and get out there for a motorcycle ride.